Good morning. My name's Kendall, and I have a lot to tell you about Lev Vygotsky, so let's begin. Lev Semyonovich Vygotsky was born in 1896 in modern-day Belarus. He had a very prestigious education, which he completed both with private tutors and at a Moscow university. And he died relatively young at age 37 in Moscow in the Soviet Union. And despite his young age at his death, he's been one of the most influential, not only Soviet philosophers, but also philosophers of the 20th century. So a little bit of cultural context is he lived in a time of lots of political turmoil and unrest. He lived through the 1917 Russian Revolution, and he witnessed the foundation of the Soviet Union, which was founded on a lot of ideas that came from class conflict and iniquity in the system. And he had firsthand experience himself with anti-Semitism. So a lot of his ideas as egalitarian might have been formed from this sort of background. Influences on him, Spinoza was one of his early philosophical influences, as well as Marx. And he had a lot of revolutionary contemporaries, including one of his private tutors who was put into exile for revolutionary activity. So he had some Soviet ideals in his background. What are his big philosophies? So his fundamental ideas include that humans are capable of learning generally, whether they have any input or not. We have elementary mental functions that make us capable of learning, and those are attention, sensation, perception, and memory. So that's how we learn. And then internalization is the process through the elementary mental functions interact with social and external factors, and we internalize those into internal cognitive processes, and that's where learning occurs. So we'll put EMF over there on our diagram, which, by the way, is scaffolding, which is one of his ideas that we'll get to a little later. Another one of his is social learning theory. So he believed that learning occurred through a social process of imparting knowledge from a teacher to a learner, and the learner observes what the instructor is doing and will later internalize it and extrapolate meaning. So social learning occurs when there's interaction with a more knowledgeable other who imparts these ideas. And by this process, learning can actually precede development, which means that you can have an understanding by watching, even if it's something that you're not able to do yet yourself. So that's social learning. Language was a big part of Vygotsky's philosophy. He believed that language is imperative to have thought. So he believed there was no thought without language, and language develops from external speech, where you think out loud, and moves to internal speech, which allows you to have internal cognitive processes. And mediation is the idea that all of your thoughts are shaped by the tools available for you to think. So if you speak English, you will think in English, and your thoughts will be bound by what you have available through your language and your cultural context. Importance of play. Play was a big one for Vygotsky. He believed that it allows you to experiment and understand social rules and develop creativity through an explorative process that helps you get to higher level thinking and self-regulation through experimentation and hands-on learning. And his big theories are scaffolding, which is what this diagram is. So scaffolding is the stuff around the building that lets you build the building inside it. So it's a framework, and that applies to his theory in that a teacher should provide scaffolding or support within which a learner or student can construct their own understanding and meaning. Examples of scaffolding would include training wheels on a bike that help you learn to ride independently eventually, chunking knowledge into smaller pieces, giving explanations, or letting students do guided practice. So in all of these examples, the learner is still the primary agent in charge of doing the thinking and the learning, but the teacher provides a framework, and that's called scaffolding. His other biggest theory was called the zone of proximal development, which is the idea that humans are capable of learning regardless of the environment they're in. If you ignore cases of extreme neglect, humans are going to learn to walk and talk. but you learn more and you learn faster with the aid and assistance or scaffolding from a more knowledgeable other. So the zone of proximal development is the region between what you can learn on your own and the maximum possible you could learn at your developmental phase. So a 2-year-old, even with a very knowledgeable other, is probably never going to learn differential equations because it doesn't fall within their zone of proximal development. So to illustrate, this is a hypothetical chart. There are no units on this, but just to understand it visually, we have 2 learners here. The green one has access to a knowledgeable other and receives instruction. The dotted blue line learner is only learning within their self-directed ability. So over time, you see both learners are learning. The blue learner is also learning, but at a much slower rate than the learner who receives instruction from a more knowledgeable other. And this is the idea of instruction should fall within a learner's zone of proximal development. So lasting impacts of Vygotsky's work. He was an early believer in special education. He worked with blind and deaf-mute students. And he believed that with appropriate instruction, so instruction within their medium and within their zone of proximal development, they could achieve comparable levels to students without any sort of mental handicap or physical handicap in this case. His influential works, his 2 most influential widely read works are Language and Speech and Mind and Society. And his most influential theories are the zone of proximal development and scaffolding. So those are his works. And support for modern day pedagogical applications also have a lot of foundations in Vygotsky's work. So differentiated learning, which is the idea that instruction should be tailored to individual learners and their capability, has foundations within the zone of proximal development. Play-based and project-based learning has foundations in scaffolding, where the student gets to have hands-on work and learn within a framework. Sociocultural learning is the foundation for collaboration and group work, social learning, and mediation, the idea that the language you speak will influence your thought, has led to more culturally informed teaching methods. So some opposing views and critiques. Vygotsky is often compared to Piaget, but there are actually a lot of very big differences between these 2 influential thinkers, and in some ways they're diametrically opposed. So Vygotsky believes that learning is socially dependent, whereas Piaget said it's autonomous, and Vygotsky says that learning occurs on an individual basis, but Piaget says it occurs at universal phases that you must master to move on to the next. And my own critique of Vygotsky's view is the idea of mediation, and I'm not sure that language actually limits thoughts, because personally, I have plenty of experiences where I have a thought, but I don't have the language to express it or communicate it. So I think there's no grounds for that in the mediation idea. And we've gone over 5 minutes, but thank you so much for listening. Here are my references, and hope you learned something new about Vygotsky today. Thank you.